Hello and welcome back to another episode of
Tube Talk!
Welcome back, everybody.
The first for spring, the first week of September.
Indeed, it is.
Not very
And I was going to flip the camera then, that'd be unprofessional, but it's very rainy and wet outside.
Not very spring-like.
It's not nice. There's not a single patch of blue sky.
Yeah, very winter-like.
So that's a bit tragic. However, we have a happier thing to talk about.
We have lots of happy and interesting things to talk about this week.
Starting with last week, all the Bosma family, the entirety of us, went to Waikato Stud, which was amazing.
We did, it was fantastic. We went down there, stayed the night, hoped to see a foal being born, 350 broodmares on the place, and no foals. So we couldn't get up in the middle of the night. But so we got to, you guys missed out on seeing a foal, but the hospitality was unbelievable.
Yeah, big thank you to the Chittocks.
Big thank you to the Chittocks, had a great time. Bottle of red wine, jumped on their trampoline, drove around their Polarises.
Gosh,
Sophie, Kate and Doug all drove.
And who was the best driver out of all of us three?
I've got to say you because you're interviewing me.
No, you gave me an 8 out of 10.
I did, you were very good. So thank you very much, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, we had so much fun. Thank you. Last week we had 4 runners who we'll briefly talk about, starting with Loose Cannon, who won on debut.
Very impressive, unbeaten in her life, 2 trials, 2 wins. We thought the barrow draw would be difficult for her, but she overcome it, came it in a strong field, sprinted up the rail, got up and won. Massive future in front of her. Tavistock filly, she'll be aimed at 1,000 guineas. She'll only have another 2 runs before then, over the next 3 months. But we think she's a Group 1 filly. $12 she paid.
Impressive.
Very impressive, very good horse.
We also had Hasbro in the same race, who came 4th.
Horse we've got very big plans for. He is a stayer, lovely run for 4th, just the 1200 probably a touch too short for him, but he was strong all the way up the straight, wasn't beaten far. He is on target to be on a plane for Australia next month, and we're aiming him at the VRC Derby. Excited about his season.
And we also had Mighty Solomon, who came 4th.
The old boy, 8-year-old, fresh up against a field of young up-and-coming horses, carrying top weight at 61 kilos. Did have a claim ridden very, very well too by Tim Johnson. Strong finishing, just missed 3rd, has set him up for a good spring. We'll just decide whether he goes back to Hawke's Bay on the 22nd now, or there's actually some nice races at Riccarton for him, whether we send him down there. Has been nominated for the Copeland's Mile. Would love him to win a group race, and could be his last opportunity, well, his last season to be aimed at those kind of races. So we'll look at that for him.
And finally, we had Rakik, who came 5th in Sydney.
Very good run. Got into a nice spot. All the horses started to move around him. He got shuffled back to second last on the turn. Finished very strongly for 5th, beaten just over a length. Was very strong on the line and still coming. Is going well. Doesn't need a break yet. Will go either 2,000 or 2,400 metres in a listed race next start. Just needs to draw well and he can win at his next start. And
this week we have got no runners, which is insane.
Insane in the membrane.
I was thinking, is it going to happen? Because we had a few like 1 runner weeks and it happened.
I know.
We had no runners.
No runners at all, which means we can all have a sleep in. But it does give us an opportunity to talk about something else very important.
It does. It gives us an opportunity to talk about the Messara report, which Dad Segway, he was on the TV for.
Oh yes, I was interviewed on TV3 News about it last Friday. It came out on Thursday with their bullet points, and I had a good read. I had a read through it, but I've read the full 86-page report now, so I've got a good handle on what it is, and yeah, we can chat about it. Look, I think overall, I think it is a good blueprint for the future, but there are some issues within that report which could affect funding. It's very, very important for New Zealand racing that we have a plan going forward, which this does give us, but there's some fishhooks in there, which I think we are going to discuss. There were 17 recommendations, and I think there's 3 in particular that we want to pinpoint.
We are, and we were going to start with the betting levy.
So just over $13 million that is paid to the government in betting levies, which is proposed to be retained. So that's great for the codes. That's $13 million of extra money which we will have to distribute for prize money, infrastructure, those kind of things. So that's a no-brainer. Getting that is brilliant and will help, investment. It's in itself, it's not enough, but it's a little start. So I'm rapt that if we can get cross-party support for it, which we will need, because Labour and New Zealand First support it, but the Greens won't, so we need National to support it as well, who are in opposition. I think the signs are good that they will. So the betting levy is a no-brainer, is a very good thing.
Mm-hmm. And another point we want to talk about was reduction and track numbers. Sorry, my handwriting's appalling.
That's right, the reduction of track numbers. Everybody agrees 48 tracks is too many in New Zealand, and reducing them to 28 is in the plan, which I think is great. It could even go further and be a couple more, but I think going to 28 is great. It means that we've got less tracks that we need to spend money on, and we're in an entertainment sport, so we need great facilities for people to go to and want to return to. So I've got no issues with that. There's a couple of little issues, I think, with which tracks are being closed, but that'll work itself out. A couple of obvious ones is Rotorua, which tends to usually get good crowds and is in the middle of, well, it's close to the Waikato where most of the horse numbers are, so I suspect that one may not close. Te Teko is an odd one, I think, to keep open as opposed to Rotorua. I was slightly surprised by that. And on the West Coast, they've got 4 tracks and they've nominated Kumara as the one to remain open, which is slightly odd as well in that they don't have a lot of facilities for horses and overnight staying. So that could well change. I think Hokitika would be a great place to stay open. It's the only right-handed track south of Tauranga. Gives a little bit of something a little bit different, and it's a great committee there. But a bigger issue with the track closures, and this is a key if you read the report, is what they're saying is with the 20 tracks that are closing, that they want those tracks to be closed and the land sold and the funding of that to be given to New Zealand thoroughbred racing. And they're talking about changing legislation to ensure that, clarifying legislation to ensure that NZTR can get ownership of the courses and take the funding for the sales. And the obvious big one is Avondale, which is probably worth 100 million, maybe even up to 200 million dollars. The problem with that is I don't think it's clear in the legislation that NZTR or the racing board owns the land, owns Avondale or any of the courses, and so I can't imagine that a lot of the courses and clubs will say, sure, take our land. And I think that there might be quite a long, drawn-out process of finding out who actually owns the land, whether it's the clubs, the club members, whether it's NZTR, who owns the land, where does that money go to? So I don't think we can actually have confidence in the short term that funding will come into thoroughbred racing. And that's $200 million, and a lot of that money has been earmarked for infrastructure. So I think we've got to, for the moment, put that aside and say, well, though that funding isn't imminent coming through. I could be wrong, but that's how I read it, and I'll be very surprised if clubs that are closing don't fight to say, no, NZTR, you don't own this land, we do. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be a very interesting one moving forward, and that's an important funding model.
Mm-hmm. The final point we would like to talk about was the outsourcing of the TAB.
And this is a big one. The TAB obviously is where everyone bets, and the betting money provides the racing board the ability to distribute funding to the codes, thoroughbred harness and the greyhounds, funding to them for stake money, which runs our races. So what they're talking about is leasing out the wagering license to an offshore provider to run New Zealand, to run the New Zealand TAB for 25 years for an upfront fee, I believe an annual payment, and then there'll also be funding coming back to Wagering New Zealand, who will distribute it to the codes from the betting turnover. The problem with this is, if you're talking about a 25-year license, you're actually probably talking about selling the TAB, because if somebody takes that license for 25 years, then the next 25 years, every person that signs up for an account with the new entity, and let's just say for argument it's Tabcorp in Australia, so Tabcorp buys the wagering license. they're a privatised company. They have responsibilities to their shareholders for profit. They don't have a responsibility to government or anybody. Their biggest responsibility is to their shareholders to make profit. So you give that to them. Every account holder that joins Tabcorp. So in 10 years' time, if they decided for any reason, look, the wagering licence isn't working out for us, we want to get out of this contract, what happens to all those owners? All those account holders stay with Tabcorp, and therefore the TAB in New Zealand, or Wagering New Zealand, has no account holders, and they're the ones spending the money. So I think that's an issue. We're actually selling the TAB rather than it being a wagering license. I think in effect we're actually selling it for good, which creates a bunch of questions. I think there's also issues because whoever is going to be the licensee, and again, it's not necessarily Tabcorp, but I'm just using Tabcorp in Australia as an example. They are going to have broadcasting rights, and they're also going to have a big say in the scheduling of our racing. So if they've got broadcasting rights, they can determine whether or not we have 1 minute coverage going into a race, and then they cross straight back to Australia for Australian racing, or that we have a 10-minute build-in. And that coverage of racing is really important for investment. So with them having that ability, I think we need to very carefully negotiate what the minimum requirements are for that coverage, because if we want to encourage investment in gambling on New Zealand racing, we need good coverage. It's the same with exactly the same with programming of races. So if an Australian entity owned the wagering license and they had a big say in programming, it may be in their best interests to say, well, we're covering Australian racing from 2 p.m. New Zealand time when Sydney racing starts and Melbourne racing starts. So really we want the New Zealand product to be streaming into Australia from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. That ends up being 7 a.m. to midday in New Zealand. So if we had to start running our races in mid-mornings, that would stop a lot of people being able to go to the races involvement, and a lot of pleasure, because people like going in the afternoons, particularly on weekends. I'm not saying any of this is going to happen, but I'm saying these are things that we need to consider very, very carefully when we are negotiating the wagering license. And if we don't get these things right, we may not be in a great position in 10, 15 years' time. So all of these, we need a very, very good negotiator for this. And I'm not saying that outsourcing the TAB is necessarily a bad idea, but what I'm saying is how we outsource it will be the key to the funding for New Zealand racing, and particularly New Zealand thoroughbred racing, which we care about the most, well into the future. Personally, and in there it said there was no appetite for opening up the market in New Zealand to outside providers and leaving the TAB as a monopoly here. Personally, I'd love to see bookmakers come into New Zealand. I think that having bookmakers in Australia as well as the TAB has encouraged people to spend money on the horses, to gamble, to invest, and that's increased their turnover. It's exciting going to the racing with bookmakers there and the TAB, and it's great. And if we had that in New Zealand, it would encourage investment. And while it says there's no appetite, and I think that's probably because it's a difficult political football to sell to people bringing bookmakers into New Zealand, I think that if we had bookmakers here, I think turnover in New Zealand would go up, competition would go up. We could tax the bookmakers for racefield legislation, and also, and also consumption tax, point of consumption tax, which would increase the takings for all the codes in New Zealand. So that's I've been talking too long. So look, that's my concerns. It's a great blueprint for New Zealand thoroughbred racing, as long as we can work through these details properly. And if we can, then hopefully we can achieve the goals. But there's fish hooks in there which we need to be careful of and manage. Mm-hmm. So that's my report on the Messara report and my thoughts. It's
your 2 cents. And to finish off, it has been a slightly longer tube talk, but it's been an important topic. To finish off, we will still be doing Bet of the Week. However, Dad's not in charge of it because he failed us again last week.
I know. I was going so well for a while, but you are 1 for 1. You're unbeaten.
No, I think I'm 1 for 2.
No, you're 1 from 1. The other one was scratched.
Oh, okay. So we're doing fine. Drum roll, please, Albert.
Bet of the Week.
Tell Me More, running at Te Aroha on Sunday in race 3. It is a hurdle race. Buddy Lemus claims 2 kilos. I'm not sure what that means.
It means that whatever the horse's weight is, so he carries 68 kilos, you take 2 kilos of it, he only carries 66, because he's considered an apprentice for jumping, even though he's actually a very experienced flat rider and a very good rider. So that's a positive.
There we go. Thank you, Dad. Dad's going to have to help me explain a couple little points. And he has had a trial leading in where he ran second.
On the flat.
On the flat.
I think he'll be at long odds, Soph, and I think you've found one there. A horse that is fit, jumps well, and I think you might be 2 for 2 and he might pay $17 and I'll be barred for life.
Yeah, so everyone go put $1 each way on that one. That is my bet of the week. And yeah, let's hope it does well. I only picked it because of the name. That's my rule.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you, Albert.
We'll see everyone next week.
See you then.
Bye.